Jin, they were bound to serve, but not to suffer. Break their chains. Rescue them. And you will be granted a wish.
Welcome back, Exile. In today's video I want to showcase my Poor Man's Woodloop Mirage edition. This is technically still a work in progress, but I felt that I couldn't let you guys wait much longer. My character is currently level 99, though I'm on my way to 100, and I think I have enough footage for a proper showcase. Thank you for your patience. I want to quickly point out that this is not a build for beginners, not a league starter, and not easy to play. It adds a certain amount of difficulty for obvious reasons. As my thumbnail indicates, there's a lot more going on this time around. For once, GGG did not nerf my build but actually buffed it. Triggerbots now have roughly 8% more damage, and on top of that, it is now super easy to reach the 12 triggers threshold with a single jewel or low tier beltcraft due to the changes to the Like Clockwork passive, now granting a base 50% cooldown recovery. That said, it is technically possible this league to reach up to 15 triggers per second, yet what you will be seeing in this video is still only 12 triggers per second, same as last league. It takes a lot more work to get to this point, and I haven't reached that yet. Furthermore, the build has received a couple optimizations that now make it stronger than before, with better clear, better single target, and even worse frame rate. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to point out that my forum guides no longer exist, as I find them too cumbersome to update. So you can now find an extensive explanation within the notes section of my POB template that is linked in the description. There is a lot of stuff in there that you might find useful. Alright, with that out of the way, let's talk about the notable changes for this league's iteration. First off, as I've previously mentioned, it is now technically possible to reach the next trigger threshold, resulting in a 25% increase in trigger rate. However, it gets quite expensive and takes a lot of crafting effort that will likely take me the rest of the league, which is why I decided to post this video sooner rather than later. If you check my POB template, you will see that there's an additional 40% cooldown recovery found on belt and boots to reach the 90% threshold for the next trigger cap. I'm really curious to see what that would look like, as the build is already pushing my CPU to its limits. But you can totally do that now thanks to the buffs to Saboteur. As for my current progress, you can always take a look at my character on my profile linked in the description. I was sorely disappointed to find that a whopping 4 people are playing my build this league, myself included, despite the huge buffs, and I do intend to change that. So if you enjoy what you're seeing, please do me a favor and like and share the video. I would appreciate that. Anyhow, I took another close look at my spell setups. As I like to say, there's always room for improvement. And even though I've been playing this build for years, I got somewhat complacent and never checked for these small details. So what I did is that I optimized all of my setups in a way where it's more consistent to trigger the spells even in lower tier content, and for better life cost and DPS efficiency. Just because you have been doing something for years doesn't mean you can't improve. Speaking of life cost, the build no longer uses the Covenant body armor, but instead now uses a spell crit shaper chest piece. Previously, the unique body armor would add a not insignificant risk to the build that wasn't really worth the trade-off. While we lose a bit of DPS this way, it is overall not a big deal and the build feels more comfy to play. Furthermore, I have made some changes to some of the existing setups, adding and removing some spells. For example, the build no longer uses Volatile Dead. There's a reason for this, and I have outlined it in the notes of my POB, so give that a quick read if you want to know why. The removal of Last League's crafts is fairly annoying, as I now have to resort to a dual mod Watcher's Eye again, as well as losing 30% max life total. Most of this is made up for in other ways and can even surpass the previous iteration with higher tier and more expensive crafting. With that out of the way, let's take a quick look at what the optimization looks like versus the endgame setup of Last League. This is a quick test I ran with a white Minotaur map, and as you can see, this new iteration can keep up with lower investment. Even with worse gear, the TTK difference here is only like half a second. I also noticed the improvements during general gameplay. Overall, it felt a bit more consistent, and the clear is noticeably better and slightly faster. I also made some nice graphics to show and explain some of the mechanics the build uses that I should maybe talk a little more about, so let's dive into those. A lot more of this is explained in detail in my POB notes, so I will keep my explanations fairly brief. First off, when spells are linked to cast on damage taken, they receive a global cooldown and a damage tracker. Spells which are on cooldown do not track damage taken. This is why I use what I call staggered setups, where I use different tiers of the gem with varying damage thresholds to create a feedback loop that respects spell cooldowns. Here's a graph that shows how much the damage threshold difference is between the various tiers of cast on damage taken. For example, going from level 1 to level 2 requires an additional 49 damage taken, and going from level 2 to level 3 requires an additional 70 damage taken. I have outlined that the optimal thresholds thus are level 1 to 5, which is what I use. The damage threshold takes a big spike after level 6. Next, I want to quickly address Pierce and its inherent advantages and why we need it in the build. This graph here shows that projectiles that can return will not hit the same target again if they don't pierce it. For spells such as Fireball, this is even more important because the fireball otherwise explodes and doesn't return at all. It also feels much better for clear, and I highly recommend you do add it to the build as outlined in my notes. I've also been asked how does one play this build, how do I not die all the time, etc. This graph here shows how you should approach enemy packs. Try to avoid moving in a straight line, as that's a quick way back to your hideout after getting blasted in the face by a volley of projectiles or charging rovers. What I like to do is circle around the mobs and then swerve into them, letting my returning projectiles clean up behind me. If you observe my gameplay in this video, you will understand what I'm talking about. This is the same strategy I use for the breach boss in maps, as his high physical damage slams tend to one-tap me. Also, I try to avoid too many damage mods, as the build isn't exactly tanky and basically relies on a decent life pool, high recovery and crowd control. In general, try not to cast Forbidden Rite or pop a Deidris elixir while at low health and near enemies, and don't try to rush too far ahead with your Triggerbots lagging behind. I wish they had more base movement speed, but it is what it is. That pretty much covers it, as the rest is explained in my POB. As always, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comments. Overall, I like how the build plays now, even though the beginning was quite rough and a bit of a struggle. This build is what I would call the Dark Souls of builds, in that it's really rough early on and you might die a lot, but once you basically get good and have your gear together, it becomes an absolute breeze to play and feels super rewarding. Anyways, that's gonna be it from me for today. I hope you enjoyed this showcase, And if you liked the video, you know what to do. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Cheers!